Good morning, members. Welcome to the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. I strongly encourage all members who aren't currently present to come down to room 126 as quickly as possible so we can establish a quorum and the hearing can commence. We'll start as a subcommittee until we have a quorum, and then we'll take the roll at that time. We only have 4 requests on the agenda today. So the normal course of our presentations is the authors will be given 3 minutes to present, followed by the state auditor. Representatives from the affected agencies will be given 2 minutes, and then public comment will also be limited. The first 2 persons to speak normally get 1 minute, and then if you could just state your name and the group that you're with and your position on the audit, that would be appreciated. We'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. There's a lot of things going on today, so I know that we'll have people coming in and out. But now we're going to move on to our regular business. We always have the state auditor give us a bit of an update on what the office is working on, and with that, welcome Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, for the record, my name is Elaine Howell, California State Auditor. As far as a status report, we currently have 18 audits underway. We've started all of the audits that the Joint Legislative Audit Committee has approved this year. We have 14 JLAC audits underway, 4 statutory audits. The statutory audits are the single audit that we do of federal dollars, so we just finished it and we're ready to start it again, so we've commenced that work. The audit of the state's financial statements, and then a couple of small audits that we do either on an annual basis or twice a year, which is the cash count and the treasury count. What I did want to note as far as the JLAC audits that we have started, there were 3 that the committee asked my office to make a priority as far as starting those immediately after the February hearing. We did that. We commenced the audit Every Woman Counts, the citations penalty account audit, and the beverage container recycling audit. Our plan is to issue all 3 of those audits in June, so we should have those by June 10th. Every Woman Counts citations penalty account will go out on the 17th of June, and the beverage container recycling audit will be issued publicly on June 22nd. Just 2 other notes, and then we can move on to any questions you might have. We have 2 audits that we will be publishing this month. One is on the Medi-Cal TARS program, looking at whether or not there are ways that the process for Medi-Cal TARS could be streamlined. And then the second component of the Department of Corrections audit that Assemblymember Monning was a requester on. So that's the second piece of the audit that we were asked to look at: 3 strikes, overtime, etc. So those 2 audit reports will be issued this month. The Corrections audit will go out on May 18th. The TARS audit will be going out on May 27th. As the chair indicated, there are 4 requests to be heard by the committee today. I have the resources to start all 4 audits over the course of the next couple of months. So between May, June, and July, we can start 5 audits. So if it's the committee's desire to approve all 4 audits, we would be able to start those. And we will have resources available for any audits that come before the committee in August. With that, I can answer any questions members may have.
Looks like we don't have any questions, so we'll move right along. Seeing no authors actually present on 3 of the requests, we do have one. Normally we would save the committee requests for the end, but since no one else is here, we'll have Senator Wolk and I presenting on 2010-117, the Department of Water Resources General Obligations Bonds Fund, and I'm going to turn the gavel over to Senator Ashburn to chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is item number 2, item number 2010-117, related to the Department of Water Resources bond funds. Chairperson Huber and Senator Wolk, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Senator Wolk, Assemblymember Buchanan, and myself have all authored this request for an audit of the Department of Water Resources Management's general obligation bonds. The LAO recently issued a report on March 8th, 2010, which recommended that JLAC approve an audit of the department's management of general obligation funds. The LAO report found that it's difficult to determine how DWR spends and tracks bond funds. They also highlighted that expenditures may not be in line with the legislature's original funding intents. And over the past 10 years, the department has been allocated over $15 billion from bond measures. And given the magnitude of money the department's responsible for, it's important that we provide the necessary oversight for these funds. The audit request follows up on the LAO report, and it's intended to provide the legislature and the department with the tools to ensure appropriate and effective distribution of general obligation bond funds. And I'd also like to invite Senator Wolk, who's the co-requester on this audit, to make some comments.
I agree.
So eloquent.
The LAO is here, and I think rather than our speaking about their report, I think it speaks for itself, and they can certainly speak for themselves. I ask for your aye vote.
Great. Thank you, Senator Walk. Turn to, is it LAO that would like to speak now?
My name is Catherine Freeman. I'm with the Legislative Analyst's Office, and I can either be here to answer questions, or if you'd like more information on our report, I'd be happy to provide that. It's up to the committee.
Okay, thank you. We turn to the State Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning. We just have a few objectives. This is similar to audit work we've done in the past. We've audited bonds. In fact, there's reference to an audit we had done at the Department of Water Resources a couple of years ago related to Prop 84 bond funds. So the objectives basically require us, first of all, to understand the current oversight and accountability structure. There is some structure that's external to the Department of Water Resources. That is a structure that was set up by the Governor's Office, and in fact, we have looked at that structure as part of our high-risk work that we've done in the past. And we think the structure that's been set up by the Governor's Office through the executive order is a good structure if it's followed. So what this audit would ask us to do is to take another look at that and see how the Department of Water Resources is participating in that structure. One of the requirements of the executive order when the Governor set up that structure was for any state department that was managing bonds to come up with a plan for how they were going to manage those bonds, a plan for how they were going to provide oversight for those bonds during the course of the issuance of the bonds and the expenditures, and then after the fact some audit work as well. So we certainly have looked at that in the past, and again we'll look at it during the course of this audit. Then the remaining objectives are asking us to look at a 5-year period starting in July of 2005, carrying through June of 2010, so June of this year, and look at a variety of things. First of all, the amount of bonds that the department has received, obligated, and spent. So coming up with an array of all of the bonds that the department is responsible for managing. And then determining how well they ensure that these bond funds are used for the purposes for which those bonds were approved. So making sure that expenditures are in line with what's expected. Another objective, looking at the expenditures, looking at bond proceeds and expenditures separate from some other projects, the State Water Project, for example, that the department is responsible for. One of the concerns that I think LAO had in their report is related to shifting of bond funds and whether or not bond funds are being shifted between projects or programs, and whether or not that's allowable and appropriate. So that would be another objective that we would complete. Another area is looking at the debt service. So what does all this mean to the state of California? How much debt service has the state incurred related to these GO bonds? And then finally, kind of a catch-all, looking at an overall assessment of how well the Department of Water Resources is demonstrating its ability to effectively manage the current volume of bond funds that it has received and how it intends to manage those in the future. The budget we put together for this audit is 1,850 hours. An audit of that size would take us about 5 months to complete, depending upon how we staff it. So with that, I certainly can answer any questions members may have.
Good. Thank you. Questions at this time of the auditor? Seeing none, we have representatives of the Department of Water Resources, if you would like to comment.
Certainly, and good morning. My name is Sue Sims, and I'm Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Water Resources. As mentioned, we have received a considerable amount of bond money over the last 10 years, not only for flood, but for regional water management and other habitat projects. In reviewing the details of this requested audit, I wanted to let you know we've already begun compiling that information. We're confident that we could work well with the auditor in providing you the information that you've asked for. I did want to mention, and I think perhaps this goes without saying, but I would like to say it anyway, that the department takes very seriously its responsibility and its obligation in terms of managing these bond funds efficiently, in terms of managing them for their intended purposes and with transparency to be consistent not only with state law but with the legislative direction. So I do have staff here today if there are specific questions, and if not, we would be happy to work with the auditor in whatever capacity the committee decides.
Thank you very much. Ask the chairwoman and Senator Wolk if you have any concluding comments.
I urge your support.
Well stated. Is there a motion? We have a motion. Senator Alquist, second. Assemblymember Monning. Please call the roll. We don't have a quorum. I'm informed. But as soon as a quorum is established, we have the motion and the second, and we will proceed. So thank you. Do we have any of the authors of the audit requests present? Okay. If we'd ask the Sergeant at Arms to please make contact with those members so that we can move forward with the items on the agenda for today. I'll turn the gavel figuratively back to the chairwoman.
Thank you so much, Senator Ashburn, for your great stepping in the shoes of the chair. We cannot proceed with any additional audit requests because we don't have any additional authors here. We can't establish a quorum without 2 more assembly members. So the sergeant has been trying diligently to get them here, but we'll be temporarily holding until we get them here. Thank you. We just need 1 more assembly member.
Right. You can come and sit up here over there, and then did you just see what happened? Yes, that's what they'll do. They'll follow the same, and then they'll ask if there's anybody from the department to comment, and then you can just jump in.
Thank you.
Okay. You bet. No problem. Sure.
Well, we're still waiting for one more Assembly member in order to establish a quorum, so we may interrupt this presentation, but I see that we actually have the committee has granted the staff of Senator Steinberg to present on 201-119 the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, since Senator Steinberg is in D.C. right now trying to help us get additional resources from the federal government. So with that, we have his staff member to present on his request.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. My name is Susanna Cooper. I appreciate the chance to present on behalf of Senator Steinberg this morning. Senator Steinberg respectfully requests that the state auditor conduct a performance audit of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and specifically the Division of Professional Practices Unit, or DPP, for the reasons detailed in his letter of April 21st. The DPP is responsible for educator discipline. The duties of this division include investigating allegations of misconduct by credentialed teachers, credentialed administrators, and teacher applicants. It has come to the Senator's attention that a substantial backlog and consequent delays exist in processing documentation within DPP. This raises the serious question of whether there are teachers or administrators in California schools today whose credentials have not been appropriately sanctioned because DPP has not reviewed allegations against these teachers in a timely manner. Delays in these matters are of special concern because allegations can become time-barred pursuant to statute. Allegations generated by school districts can be impossible to investigate if so much time has passed that witnesses can no longer be located. It has also recently come to the Senator's attention that the full body of the Commission may not be aware of the extent of this backlog and its ramifications with respect to meting out timely discipline. At an August 2009 Commission meeting, a Commissioner asked the CTC General Counsel whether, in light of the recent nursing board scandal, there was a backlog within DPP. The General Counsel assured the Commission that although parts of the system were overloaded, DPP had, quote, little backlogs from time to time, end quote, and hoped to never get into a situation that the nursing board faced. However, in August 2009, it is believed there was in fact a backlog in excess of 12,000 unprocessed documents that had been received by DPP as far back as January 2007. These documents had not yet been reviewed nor acted upon because of the magnitude of the backlog. A performance audit of the DPP is needed now to ensure timely processing of documentation pertaining to educator discipline, to ensure the safety and welfare of students and employees in California schools. The Senator urges that this audit request be granted so we can maintain a high level of public confidence in California teachers and other credentialed public school employees. The Commission tells our office it has hired an independent investigator to look into allegations of insufficient attention to potentially troubling activity on the part of school employees. That is a good sign, and it may inform the auditor's work. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we could hear from the State Auditor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, there's quite a few objectives. I'll try to go through these relatively quickly. Initially, the first objective that we intend to complete is look at the Commission's process and DPP, certainly looking at policies and procedures and what practices they use to process allegations that they receive from a variety of sources, and determine whether those practices really do ensure that they're thoroughly addressing allegations and doing so in a timely manner. We've been asked to look at the database of these various allegations, looking at the accuracy and completeness of that database, and if there have been any changes to the database, were they appropriate and are they fully documented? Looking at the number and types of reports that the Commission receives. They can receive reports from a variety of entities such as law enforcement, the court, from a school district, a personal affidavit, those types of things. So looking at the types of reports and the number of those types of reports that the Commission has received and processed. Certainly look at the backlog, determine whether they have a backlog and how old that backlog is, so basically intending to age the various reports and allegations that have come in. Taking a hard look at the process itself and identifying key milestones in that process to try to determine how long the Commission is taking to complete one step to the next. Again, looking to see how streamlined the process is and how diligent the Commission is in reviewing and investigating these allegations. One piece of that, an additional objective, is specifically looking at any action by the Commission or the Division to follow up on information that they've received. So if they've received documentation from multiple sources, how quickly and how promptly has the Commission reacted to that and requested additional information. A specific objective asking us to look at criminal reports that the Commission has received, again, is asking us to look at timeframes. So specifically looking at the amount of time that elapses between the Commission's receipt of information from the Department of Justice, from the FBI, and when they actually take final action on that particular case. So again, looking at how prompt and how diligent the Commission is in investigating these various allegations that come to them. In addition to that, looking at the number of recommendations for adverse action by the committee, and in how many cases do those credential holders actually request an administrative hearing before the Commission, and how has the Commission acted on those recommendations. And then, as Ms. Cooper indicated, looking at the statute of limitations. So are there a number of reports or allegations that have not been pursued because of the time-based statutes, and that the statute of limitations has prevented them from further pursuing those particular allegations? A couple additional objectives, again, related to aging, the number and age of reports and allegations that have not been reviewed by the committee. So looking at these cases that they were not able to pursue, looking at the time frame for those, and certainly the reasons why they were not followed up on. And then a final objective, a little bit different, but something similar to what we've done in another audit where we conducted an audit of the UI Appeals Board a couple of years ago, looking at current policies and practices of the Commission related to hiring of family members. So what Senator Steinberg is asking us to do is survey Commission staff, asking questions about familial relationships, nepotism, favoritism, etc., very similar to a request that was included in the UI Appeals Board audit. So those are all of the objectives that Senator Steinberg has asked us to complete. This audit is budgeted. It's 2,900 hours, a little bit higher than the others, but that's because of the nature of all of the different objectives, getting into the database, doing some of these time-based assessments. An audit of that size with traditional staffing would take us about 7 months to complete.
Thank you. And do we have the affected agency, commission here?
Yes, thank you. I'm Dale Jansen. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. The allegations outlined in Senator Steinberg's letter of April 21st was brought to my attention in January. And as Ms. Cooper just mentioned, that we did at that time hire hired an independent investigator to look into these allegations. In actuality, that is still going forward and should be completed sometime at the end of this month. Hopefully that would be something that could assist the auditor in their review. Regarding the backlog, there was a backlog in August of 2009, or at least the summer of 2009, but as of this date, all of those rap sheets have been, and they were low-level rap sheets, have all been processed, so that has been fully completed. We've also developed a tracking system that alerts the supervisors in the division if there's anything that's taking additional time. We've also now, regarding the rap sheets, put in place that those are handled on a daily basis rather than allowing to have them back up, so hopefully that would alleviate any sort of future backlogs. But after reviewing the audit scope and objectives, we certainly look forward to working with the auditor. We have worked with the auditor before in 2004, and I think that was a very positive process. Out of that, there were a number of recommendations that we did institute, and we actually look forward to working with the auditor. But I do want to assure you that we take this extremely seriously. We do not in any way, shape, or form want to endanger children. So anything that we're doing is with the intent of protecting children. Thank you.
Any comments from the public? You can come and take the mic right here.
My name is Mike Kaufman. I'm a member of the Committee on Teaching Credentials. In real life, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 36 years. I'm also a volunteer mentor at San Rafael High School. Mr. Jansen learned of these allegations in January 2010 because I picked up the telephone and called Commissioner Beverly Young and told her that, in my opinion, the little backlogs from time to time, characterization...
Mr. Kaufman, I'm sorry that I'm going to pause you real briefly, and I really apologize, but it is so rare that we're able to establish a quorum that we're going to do that right now.
Okay.
If the secretary can call the roll.
Huber,
Here.
here. Kodo, DeVore, Evans, Hagman, here. Monning, here. Norby, here. Ashburn, here. Aliquist, here. Cogdill, Ducheney, Dutton, Padilla, here. Wolk, here.
Thank you. I also want to recognize our newest member to the committee, Senator Alquist, which I hadn't had a chance to do that. Welcome. Thank you so much for being on the committee. And now you may return to your public comment. No. Sorry to have interrupted you mid-thought.
No, in committee, sometimes we have quorum problems too. But in January, as an attorney, I felt I had a duty to tell Commissioner Young, who was the client of General Counsel Mary Armstrong, that in my opinion, she had been misled by the little backlogs from time to time. Okay? And that's sort of what got this ball rolling. Now, with respect to this outside workplace investigator attorney, Beverly Young emailed me. It was her understanding that an external auditor had been hired, not an external workplace attorney. Here's the difference. This attorney called me at the end of March, and we spoke for 45 minutes. I asked her, who has retained you? She refused to give me that information. I asked her, to whom will you make your report? She refused to give me that information. There is a lot of nepotism within CTC. I asked her whether, could she tell me, is she related to Mary Armstrong, a neighbor? No, she wasn't. So that was mildly reassuring. I asked her whether she knew that she was supposedly investigating my allegations to Beverly Young, the commissioner. She wasn't quite sure. I asked her if she had listened to the recording, the 6 August 2009 commission hearing, because it's on the internet. The entire hearing, no, she had not. I asked her whether she was prepared to perform an actual audit. She refused to answer that question. She was more concerned with my sources of information, and I told her that was not relevant. If there's a backlog, it's because there's a backlog. It's not a backlog because person X on the state said so. My conclusion was that she was hired to do damage control, and I think it's a waste of CTC resources to have that continue one more day.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, your position on the audit?
Oh, the audit should go forward, but not this woman's. That's simply a damage control exercise based on my conversation with her. I may be wrong, but that was my conclusion. She was not prepared to do an audit. You have to do an audit for the sake of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Ashburn.
Yeah, just want to follow up on with a couple questions of you and of the executive director for the commission. Is this individual that was retained still working for the commission?
Yes, she is still working, and she hopes to have a report done before the end of this May.
Could you produce for the committee and for the auditor the contract and the deliverables and the time requirements that were specified in her contract?
Sure, that's a public document. So
okay, was that provided to the gentleman who's speaking here?
I don't believe he's ever asked for it, but
no. As I say, I asked certain questions, and
you asked them verbally and
yes.
Didn't get, sounds like, much information back.
No, and my absolute conclusion was, I don't say it's the fault of the attorney, but that may have been her marching orders. My absolute conclusion was that she was hired to do damage control, contain the damage.
Well, and that's why I'm asking for documents, because, I mean, this is a serious question in addition to the audit request, because if an individual's been retained for a specific purpose, I think the auditor would benefit from knowing what that individual's role is, what the contract says, what the dollar amounts are, what the work product is to be, the timelines, and all of that. And I would think the committee would want to know that as well. So is that a problem, producing that for us?
no, absolutely not. As I said, this is a public document. But what I can say is that the individual that we did retain, I do not know this person, have never known this person. She was referred to us by 2 other state agencies. This is what she does for a living, does workforce investigation. And somewhat concerned that the gentleman here is impugning her reputation without her being able to be here.
Well, he's entitled to say what he, I mean, the gentleman's a member of the public. He's entitled to give his opinion, and we'll let the documents and the facts speak for themselves in that regard. I just want to go to this question of nepotism. In your opinion, Ms. Howell, is it specific enough in the direction that's been given to you to take a look at the relationships within the organization there to determine if there is excessive, nepotism, for lack of a better phrase?
Yes, Senator. I think the objective, the question that Senator Steinberg posed and the objective we put together, as I indicated, is very similar to what we did on the UI Appeals Board, so we have some experience in putting this type of questionnaire together. And we actually, on the Appeals Board, had a very high response rate, and we would hope that the Commission would support us, because what we were able to do with the UI Appeals Board is get the Executive Director of the Appeals Board, or the Chair of the Board, to say, this is very important, please participate in the survey, it will be kept confidential, that type of thing, as far as information coming to the auditor's office during the course of any audit where we conduct that in confidence. So I feel comfortable that we'll be able to put this survey together and hopefully accomplish the objective that Senator Steinberg's trying to get to.
Madam Chair, just one follow-up. And would it be within your realm if, and I don't want to make any predetermination on that particular question of nepotism, but would it be within the expectation of your work that if something is found that doesn't pass the test of, would you make recommendations for policy that be adopted by the commissions to prevent and to clear up any problems in that area?
We certainly could do that, and looking at that, and that would be the first step, is to look to see if they have policies to address nepotism in the first place, and then if so, once we do the survey, determine whether or not there need to be any modifications. So we certainly could make some recommendations to that effect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Alquist.
Can I make one comment?
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
you're not a witness, or public comment. Thank you, though. Senator Alquist.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. I had not really planned to speak, but just to simply listen my first time here. Some comments. One, on the topic of nepotism. The issue is not excessive nepotism. It is just plain old nepotism. And that is something we really need to understand, because that is unacceptable. I'm glad that the Commission hired someone else to look at some of these issues, but frankly, there needs to be an independent source looking at this, and that is our state auditor. I think that's very important, because when we talk about the impact of alleged misconduct by teachers, administrators, teacher applicants, that is something that needs to be dealt with in a very quick turnaround time frame. And it seems it's the case that has not been done. So we all take this very seriously. I think this is something that should not be put on the back burner, should have a very high priority, and I would also like to make the motion for that.
The request has been moved and seconded. Any other questions from the members? Please call the roll.
Huber.
Aye.
Huber, aye. Kodo. DeVore. Evans. Hagman. Oh, I'm sorry. Evans. Aye. I'm sorry. Hagman. Monning. Norby. Norby, aye. Ashburn. Ashburn, aye. Alquist. Alquist, aye. Cogdill. Ducheney. Dutton. Padilla. Padilla, aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
The request is on call. We will leave the roll open, so we expect people to be coming back after appropriations. So it should be fine. Thanks. And I see that we do have authors here on 2010116, Assembly Members Fletcher and Nielsen.
Mr. Fletcher, good morning. Good.
And you may present. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Today we're here to ask the committee approve an audit on the Department of Mental Health Sex Offender Commitment Program. Many communities have unfortunately been touched by violence and heinous acts by violent sexual predators, and unfortunately the recent cases in San Diego are just the latest to fall prey to these types of criminals. Many of you are familiar with the case of John Albert Gardner. Gardner was a sex offender convicted of violently molesting a 13-year-old girl in 2000. He was released after 5 years in prison and recently pled guilty to the brutal rape and murder of 2 separate girls from San Diego that occurred shortly after he had completed his time on parole. These events have led to a full-fledged review and evaluation by a number of people. Our office, in coordination with some of the families, Senator Nielsen, the Sex Offender Management Board, and many other folks who have worked on these issues for many years, DAs, sheriffs, legislators who've had a commitment, all in an effort to examine every facet of the criminal justice system, but in particularly how it handles sexually violent predators. The goal is very simple, to find every possible way to protect children, ensure justice, and promote public safety. From the prosecution and sentencing of these individuals, which we've looked at, CDCR, parole processes, the various medical evaluations, post-parole registration and tracking, the Static 99 evaluation system, we're trying to take a look at every mechanism our state has to safeguard the public from criminals, is being examined, is being reviewed, in an effort to see how do we improve the system. The Department of Mental Health's Sex Offender Commitment Program is a very important piece of the overall public safety system. This program is charged with evaluating sex offenders to determine if they have a diagnosable mental disorder that makes it likely they will engage in sexually violent predatory behavior upon their release into the community. It is the key to really assess the propensity of someone to reoffend and to make sure we properly prioritize and focus on those that are most dangerous, that are most likely to reoffend. This audit is part in response to a number of questions that have been raised. There's been press reports, whistleblower accusations, and other information that suggests there may be deficiencies or there may be areas of improvement within the current system. I believe in general we have to do a better job of prioritizing our resources on those that are the most dangerous, that are the most likely to reoffend. And this program, as I mentioned earlier, has I believe the opportunity to be a key and integral part of that effort and prioritization. If diagnosed as a sexually violent predator and confirmed by a court or a jury, that individual is committed to the custody of the Department of Mental Health for appropriate treatment and confinement in a secure mental health facility. We believe examining these offenders and keeping those who are most dangerous out of our communities is of utmost importance, which is why we've requested this audit. As legislators, we need to know which programs are running efficiently and where there are potential changes in order to make it work more effectively. The goal is not to cast blame. The goal is not to point fingers. There's nothing at all we can do to bring back the victim of a past crime. But we have an obligation to do everything possible to ensure we have a system that protects our children. There are several questions to be examined. Many of these are outlined in the materials we provided, but in particular we're interested in the Department of Mental Health if they're using appropriate protocols when excusing certain offenders after level 2 paper screenings. We have concerns about the paper evaluation versus the in-person evaluation and making sure that that's being done properly. We were interested in what are the credible reasons as to why the number of civil commitments has decreased, even though the number of referrals from CDCR has increased tenfold. In particular, 2 years, from 2004 to 2006, there were less than 3,000 referrals from CDCR to the Department of Mental Health for this program. Out of those 3,000 referrals, 71 of them were referred for commitment under this program. From 2007 to 2009, there were over 22,000 referrals, yet there were only 59 commitments. We would like some more information and have that looked into. We're interested in the current process for bidding and contracting out. Psychologist working. Is it working to the detriment or is it working to the advantage of the current system? And there's some other issues that have come up that I think will be interesting as we move forward through this audit or others. It's estimated in materials from the Department of Mental Health that 40% of the offenders refuse to participate in the in-person evaluation. Was there some way that that can be weighed into their likelihood to reoffend or the scoring system that they get? There's also been some very interesting academic work and other states have done as it relates to polygraphs, and I think in some form those are appropriate to look at as well. It is our hope that this process will help improve the department, will help improve the system, and will better protect children. I've met with the Department of Mental Health, and I want to say I appreciate their tone and their efforts. Unlike other state agencies that are involved in public safety, or other state agencies that are, say, involved in corrections, that seem focused on defending the indefensible and refusing to be a part of a solution, I would like to say that the Department of Mental Health has had the opposite tone. They've welcomed the audit, they've welcomed the approach, and I think that as we go through this, they'll have some constructive solutions on how we improve the situation. I think for that, they should be applauded. This audit is a good first step, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a broader effort we're doing, but we think this is a very important program, and we think when there's areas for improvement, refinement, better prioritization, we have to do everything possible. And so I respectfully request an aye vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Nilsson.
Madam Chair and esteemed members, one of the things that is lacking legislatively often is when bills are authored, then there's no tracking of how they survive, how they're being implemented over the years, over the decades, actually. This is an area of critical importance. Justice cries out for this kind of a review and analysis. Public safety absolutely cries out for it. The Sexually Violent Predator Law and the Mentally Disordered Offender Act were all crafted to ensure that justice be done, that individuals who required treatment did receive such treatment so they would not remain a risk of danger to themselves or to other people. And it's evolved over the years. My long tenure at the Board of Prison Terms has given me a lot of concern about the implementation, following up of these statutes, the exercise of them. I can't be as generous to the Department of Corrections and Department of Mental Health as my colleague here because I've had an awful lot of experience. In the mid-'90s, mentally disordered offenders, or candidates therefore, were not being evaluated, just simply sent out the door into the streets, not being able then to receive the treatment that they did require to get better, and yet putting the public at risk. The Sexually Violent Predator Law was in no small measure written in the Board of Prison Terms during my leadership of that board. I had a genius in this area, a fellow named Rick Mandela, that knew mental health extensively and helped us carefully craft that statute so that it would survive legal challenges, which it in fact has. But if it is not used as a tool, it is of no value. If the potential candidates are not evaluated, screened, and referred, and have a hearing before the board and then referred to the district attorney for civil prosecution, they slip through the cracks. And the whole idea to protect society is to create as many nets as you possibly can to catch those individuals when there are errors in this area, individuals with mental health problems that cause them a risk of danger to the society. We cannot let that happen. And frankly, Amber Dubois, Chelsea King, ladies and gentlemen, are not rarities. Nor was Polly Klaas in the early 1990s. There are dozens of such murders, sexual crimes every year that just don't catch the fancy of the public. This one did. This is a time to review very carefully where are the statutes, how are they being implemented, are we being absolutely fastidious and erring on the side of public protection and safety. And if we are not, then we have to get back to the original purpose of what these laws were. I would argue that this is a very necessary, but not just because of this terrible tragedy. It's to prevent many, many future tragedies. I think it's a worthy endeavor, and I entreat you to approve this review.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just one point of clarification. I didn't say anything generous about the Department of Corrections.
State Auditor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, a variety of objectives. The first objective would be starting at the Department of Corrections and the Board of Parole Hearings and looking at their process for making the referral to the Department of Mental Health and assessing that process. And then the remaining objectives really do focus on the Department of Mental Health. First, starting out looking at the Department of Mental Health's process for evaluating offenders who have been referred to them by CDCR or the Board of Parole Hearings, and looking at that process to determine whether, first of all, does it comply with statute and any regulations that the department has enacted or drafted. In addition, looking at, as Assemblymember Fletcher indicated, looking at the screenings. How many of those screenings are actually face-to-face, in-person screenings? How many of these screenings are actually done by looking at the individual's file, the inmate's file, and determining whether or not that process is working well. In regard to the evaluations themselves, we've been asked to determine whether mental health conducts those evaluations or if in fact they do contract, which it's my understanding they do contract for some expertise related to that. How do they go about doing that process? How does the department assure that those individuals who are conducting these assessments have the requisite qualifications and skill set to be able to make these types of determinations? And are those qualifications and consistent with professional standards for conducting these kinds of assessments? When did the department decide to use contractors, and when did that practice begin? Is it allowable under state law? Another objective is asking us to look at the Department of Mental Health's process for reporting information to the California legislature. Is the department complying with state law with regard to reports that are expected by the legislature relative to the sex offender commitment program? And then one of the bigger objectives is actually looking at a window of time starting with 2006, and this is when the Jessica's Law, it's my understanding, came into effect. So looking at the impact and the number of referrals, as Assemblymember Fletcher indicated, the number of referrals has increased significantly in the last few years. But again, the objectives are asking us to look at the number of inmates that CDCR and Board of Parole hearings have referred to mental health for screening, and then actually at a minimum to calculate certain things. The number of inmates who actually received an in-person screening versus a paper screening. The number of inmates that ultimately received a civil commitment. And then finally, the number of inmates who were released from the program, and of those individuals, how many of those individuals actually reoffended. So really kind of a broad overview of looking at the process, starting with the Department of Corrections, Board of Parole hearings, then getting into the Department of Mental Health and really doing an assessment of their process and how diligent that process is. The audit is estimated at about 2,500 hours. An audit of that size would take us between 6 and 7 months to complete.
Thank you. And representatives from the affected agencies.
Good morning. Steve Mayberg. I'm the director of the California Department of Mental Health, and I appreciate your comments, Assemblymember Fletcher and Senator Nielsen, that we do take our responsibilities seriously and do believe that public safety is essential to whatever we do. Jessica's Law did change dramatically what we did overnight. We went from 60 to 70 referrals a month to 600 to 700 referrals a month, and needed to make sure that we had the appropriate licensed, trained clinical evaluators able to make sure that all of this was done on a timely basis. As this has evolved, that we always are looking for opportunities to see how we can make our process better. We're quite convinced that we follow the statutes, but that doesn't mean that we can't be more efficient or that there aren't ways to look at better screenings. Is there new tools? Do we have things from Sorazzo? Senator Alquist knows Sorazzo. From the Sexual Offender Management Board. We have to integrate all of that, and so it has to be a continuous quality improvement process in our department. And so we welcome this opportunity to look at this, and if there are processes we can change, efficiencies we can change, we would welcome that. And if there are statute that needs to be changed, this would be a good opportunity for us all to learn what those issues are. So,
great, thank you. Any public comment? Any questions from the members?
No, move it.
Assemblymember Hagman moves the request. Is that a second? That's a second, and then Assemblymember Norby.
Huber? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said second.
I do support the request. I'm not sure if it goes deep enough. I think the real question is the very concept of treatment, assessment. There's, unfortunately, in my view, been a medical model applied to mental health issues. You can treat cancer. You can declare a person to be cancer-free. There's absolutely no way you can declare a person to be free of whatever dark impulses drive them to do criminal acts. There's no way it can be done. Yet we use these terms, treatments, assessment, evaluation, as if there was some kind of an objective medical model, which there isn't. And that's my concern about that. The only reliable prediction of future behavior is past behavior. And so I'm not sure even how you can evaluate or treat people and have any prediction as to what their future behavior will be. And I don't know if this deals with that basic question or not, but I hope it will to a certain extent.
Steve Mayberg, Mr. Norby. You raise a good question. We do not believe that sexual offending behavior can be cured. We have a relapse prevention model. We have a containment model. I think you're right that what we have to look at is past behaviors and what are the predicates of triggering those behaviors. And so when people do come to us at Coalinga State Hospital, we're well aware that there is not a medical approach to this. It's a multifaceted approach that that we have to apply. And so we have to make sure that we follow Supreme Court guidelines in terms of civil commitments. We cannot ex post facto lock people up forever without offering them options for changing or controlling their behavior. But there is no cure for sexual offending.
To that point, Mr. Norby, on a separate bill. I mean, we have a bill going, AB 1844, that seeks to find those that are most violent, that have committed the most heinous offenses against young children, and provide a life without parole option. Because if you can't rehabilitate them and you can't cure them, and you know they're a propensity to reoffend, then the only way to protect your children is to not let them out. And then it also strives to look at some other options for people that may not constitutionally rise that level to do life without parole, or lifetime parole, some other options, focusing on the worst. I think our effort here is trying to catch the ones before they slip through the cracks and get released in society. You know, is there a way, by evaluating them, by doing the mental health screening, that you can say this person we are reasonably certain is going to reoffend, therefore we're not going to let them out. We're going to keep them under civil confinement, civil commitment. And how do we make sure that we're properly doing the screening so that we catch those types of people? You know, in the case of Gardner, there was, which did not fall under this program, but in the case of Gardner, there was a mental health evaluation done that fairly definitively said, and as we mentioned before, I don't see many mental health evaluations that say much definitively, because it's hard to know. Kind of this, a little bit of this, a little of that. We're not sure. They're kind of like economists. But it said he will reoffend. He will hurt young girls again. He's callous. He has no remorse. Do not let him out. So how do we ensure that those types of individuals are not let out? Because literally, to the point you just made, as soon as he was out and completed his parole, you know, we had a young girl, Amber Dubois, go missing. She was missing for a year. He attacked another girl in a park who got away. He attacked and killed Chelsea King. I mean, this was not an individual that should ever be let out. So how do we do everything possible to prioritize and identify those and make sure that whatever way, through increased sentencing, through parole reform, if, say, this person had 7 parole violations, maybe one of them would have got him back, whether it's fixing the SVP program, making it more efficiently, fixing the Static 99 program, which I think there's some concerns with. I mean, I think that you do everything possible across the board to try and find those that are the worst in order to better protect
Senator
them.
Alquist.
Broader effort.
Thank you. Having written the major legislation on sexual violent predators, SB 1128 in 2006, as well as really reinforcing Srirazo, the assessment tool for this, I'm really pleased to see what you are doing, Assemblyman Fletcher.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may just offer an additional point. One of the additional merits of this review might be to identify some potential legal vulnerabilities. After the passage of the original SVP, and I forgot about your efforts, Senator Alquist, later, I think 2 years in a row, or maybe 3, we came up with little fixes, anticipating legal vulnerabilities, and corrected it before we were going to be hurt in the courts to constrain our authorities under the SVP law. That may disclose some vulnerabilities here that need to be statutorily corrected to preserve the statute. And the civil commitments, the MDO and the SVP, are predicated on treatment. If we accept that you can't treat anybody, then you cannot have this civil commitment. So I will not accept that we cannot do some things to treat, to make people less disposed to commit these crimes. Therefore, we must do everything we can to find out. This may help identify some of the points to what Mr. Norby mentions here as well. But it is important for us to protect that statute, and we carefully crafted it on the Washington State model, but made it even more due process protections in this one. So this review can have additional merit to protect the statutes prospectively.
I'm going to take that as the author's close. We've already had a motion and a second. If you could call the roll, please.
Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Kodo? DeVore? Evans? Evans, I. Hagman, Hagman, I. Monning, Norby, Norby, I. Ashburn, Alquist, Alquist, I. Cogdill, Ducheney, Ducheney, I. Dutton, Padilla, Padilla, I. Wolk, Wolk, I.
Your audit has been approved.
Thank you.
We are going to now bring up 2010117, the Huber Buchanan Wolk request, which we have not taken a vote. We did have a motion and a second, but if you could call the roll on 117, please.
Huber,
Aye.
Huber, I. Kodo, DeVore, Evans, Evans, I. Hagman, Hagman, I. Monning, Norby, Norby, I. Ashburn, Alquist, Alquist, I. Cogdill, Ducheney.
Well, I just had a question. I'm sorry I didn't hear the presentation, but I'm a little concerned. What's the timing on this one? Because I'm a little concerned about potential impacts on the pending water bond.
I don't understand your question.
Well, I mean,
Sorry,
I'm not quite sure what folks are trying to get at here. I think this stuff could be available through the department. I understand they're okay with it, and I think it can be done, but I'm trying to understand how this is going to play out.
Which audit are you at?
The water.
The water audit. We would, and my status report, we have enough staff to start, if the committee chooses to approve all 4 audits, we can start these audits over the course of the next 2 to 3 months. The timing, as far as the amount of budget, it's about 1,850 hours, so an audit of that size would take us about 4 or 5 months to complete.
Okay. All right.
Ducheney, I. Dutton, Padilla, Padilla, I. Wolk, Wolk, I.
That audit has also been approved. We're going to lift the call on 2010119, Steinberg's audit request on the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Please call the roll.
Kodo, Hagman, Hagman, I. Cogdill, Ducheney, Ducheney, I. Dutton.
That audit has also been approved. We have one last audit. We have Senator Flores here to present on the California Prison Industry Authority audit requests. Senator Flores, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair.
for waiting.
I'll be very brief. This is a request of the Prison Industry Authority, and the goal here is to try to get some very solid and numbers, if you will, on how well the authority is doing. I requested this, I think, way back in 2004. This is an update. And my hope is, Madam Chair and members, that given that this is another evaluation of PIA, that the auditor's time can be minimized. I do not want to make this, one of these giant auditor reports. I would like the auditor to pick up where they left off in 2004, structure it in a way that builds on the very good audit that they did in 2004, and then ask the question whether or not from 2004 to this audit, if indeed things need to be changed structurally, or if indeed this adds value. And the goal of the audit is to try to minimize the hours, yet get a good, solid audit request back to the committee so we can have some good, solid numbers on this.
State Auditor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Senator Flores indicated, this audit is looking at the Prison Industry Authority from a variety of perspectives. The first set of objectives would be looking at their strategic plan, identifying goals and objectives, and performance measures. When we conducted our audit back in 2004, released it in December of 2004, this was an area where we found some weaknesses. We felt that they didn't have performance measures to really accurately depict how well they were doing in training inmates, selecting inmates, those sorts of things. So these objectives would get to that as far as looking at how well they've developed their strategic plan, goals and objectives. Have they identified the appropriate performance measures? What types of outcomes are they measuring and looking for? In addition to that, how do they track their performance in looking at those performance measures? How do they assess whether or not they're meeting their goals, and what changes do they make midstream, if necessary, to try to achieve those goals? Looking at the process for selecting the inmates who will participate in the training programs. How do they determine what their training needs are? And certainly looking at how do they assess whether or not this type of training is going to assist these individuals to receive gainful employment when they're released from prison. So looking at that post-employment data, if any, that's collected by PIA to determine how successful the program is. Also looking at some of their pricing and cost practices, so policies and practices related to the program. Do they conduct market analyses? How do they determine their price setting? What types of things go into the costs for the various products that they produce? How do they coordinate with the Department of Corrections for employing inmates, transporting inmates to and from PIA as far as during their workday? How do they determine how and if the PIA actually does reduce the costs of operating the Department of Corrections over time? So looking at that, these were a lot of the things that we identified in the audit in December of 2004 that were lacking. So this audit would certainly allow us to update any information or demonstrate any progress or perhaps lack of progress that PIA has had over the last 4 or 5 years. And then looking at analyzing some of their price setting practices to identify, to make sure that they do everything they can to achieve cost efficiencies, because as I'm sure you're aware, state agencies are required to purchase products from PIA. So what is PIA doing to try to keep those costs as contained as possible, and do they pass those cost savings on to the consumers, which are the other state agencies? Also, Senator Flores is asking us to look at perhaps a sample of products that are sold, those products that are sold most often. They're high volume products, and looking at cost, price, the profit margin, that sort of thing. To the extent we can, compare that to the private sector or certainly compare it to other prison industries in other states. And then looking at the top 5 customers, the 5 top consumers, one of which is the Department of Corrections, and whether or not those entities are paying more by purchasing from PIA than purchasing from the private sector. And then looking for an analysis. This was another area in our December 04 audit where we had concerns about how they were quantifying the measurable benefit of having a prison industry authority in California. So what analyses has PIA done in the meantime in the past few years to identify the benefit, so to speak, that PIA provides to the state of California, both from the training perspective for these individuals and hopefully reducing recidivism in California. So a variety of objectives. I don't want to disappoint Senator Flores, but the budget for this is about 2,800 hours because of the extent of the different work that we're asked to do. Strategic planning will be relatively straightforward, but when we get into looking at data collection, performance measurement, and then sampling some products and looking at pricing and cost and those sorts of things, that's when it's going to take a little bit more time. An audit of this size will take us about 7 months.
And we have a representative from the Prison Industry Authority first.
Yes, hello. I'm Corinne Thordson, and I'm the Assistant General Manager representing Chuck Patillo, the General Manager of California Prison Industry Authority. We agree that we need an update and, in fact, welcome this audit. So thank you, Senator.
Comments from the public?
Helen Roth Dowden from SEIU Local 1000. We would just suggest that under 3 and 4 of your analysis, where you talk about reviewing the post-employment data gathered and how the inmates are selected, that we're concerned that you measure this just not against the regular prison population, but also to take a look at those who are in vocational programs. So if you have inmates that are in vocational programs and then you have inmates that are in PIA, are those inmates that are just in the vocational programs coming out and with the same level of recidivism, the same level of training, being able to get jobs? So you're comparing apple to apples, because if you compare, people who are just coming out of prison with nothing versus PIA, you're going to get one result, versus those that are in similar vocational programs and in PIA, then I think you're going to get a different and probably a fairer result. So we would suggest that the auditor look at this and look at those vocational programs and compare them to the PIA vocational programs. So we support the idea of doing the audit.
Thank you. I'm going to give the auditor a chance to comment on whether or not that's within the scope.
Well, I think we could do it under Objective 4. So if we're looking at what PIA has done to assess its success in reducing recidivism and reducing the cost for the Department of Corrections, I would expect that they compare that. And looking at their report, they do have some analysis where they do compare individuals who go through PIA training and the recidivism rate to the general population. So what I would expect my staff to do is, to the extent that there's information that Corrections has relative to inmates who have gone through vocational programs and a recidivism rate for that unique population, then we could include that in the analysis. If we would be expected to go in and conduct that analysis ourselves, then I would consider that a scope change. So to the extent we're asked to see what PIA is doing, then I think it's within the scope of what we've been asked to do.
Since we have PIA here, let's ask them.
Thank you. The only concern that I have is that I agree that would be a good comparison as long as it's current. Because
Can you lean forward to the mic, please?
I'm sorry. I do agree that would be a good comparison for analysis, but because Corrections has lost so much of their funding for vocational education, as long as it's current comparison and not in a prior fiscal year, I think that would be a good approach.
I'm not sure what the difference would be, whether it's this year or last year. I think if you look and see whether it's in a vocational program, they're doing the same thing. Then you're comparing apples to apples. Otherwise, you know, only 14% of the people are in any program at all. So if you're going to get a different rate of recidivism rate, and we just think it's fair to compare people who've been in some program to people who've been in the PIA program.
Everyone's nodding their head in agreement.
Yes.
Everyone's nodding their head in agreement, so great.
I mean, I just think, you know, first of all, I do think the program has made major strides in the last several years, and it may be since the last audit. I don't remember when Mr. Patillo came in, but I remember that before that there were a lot of issues, and that it has improved a lot, and we get fairly regular updated reports from them, and they have started acknowledging the performance. And I worry about the cost analysis because, in truth, there is this sort of offsetting cost. I mean, their products cost more because you have to have custodial custody, just like healthcare costs more in prisons. You know, producing tables costs more in prisons. But if you get the benefit of people who get jobs when they get out, who don't recidivist, as it were, even though the state agencies may pay a little more for something, there's an offsetting benefit, and I don't want to have that lost in the cost comparison analysis. And on the other issue, I think your problem is going to be that the department can't track recidivism for nothing. So I don't know how you're going to get the data that's been suggested, but I think it is a worthy comparison. I'm just not, you can track who's been in vocational, I just don't know how easy it's going to be to track what happened to them afterwards. Although I guess some of them will be on parole, but it's a little, that may be, you may have to just kind of acknowledge that in some way, because I think the department hasn't done a real good job of doing that, although I think PIA has probably done a better job. They kind of keep track of their folks now because they're trying to get that performance data to make their annual reports make sense. But
we do not have a motion yet. Does anybody? Thank you, Senator Dutton. And a second by Assemblymember Hagman. Seeing no further questions, can you call the roll?
Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Kodo? Kodo, aye. DeVore? Evans? Evans, aye. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Monning? Norby? Ashburn? Alquist? Alquist, aye. Cogdill? Ducheney? Ducheney, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Padilla? Padilla, aye. Wolk? Wolk, aye.
Your request has been approved. Thank you. Thank you, members, for being here. We will stay open for 5 minutes to allow members to come and add on to requests. Thank you.